Welcome to the Coachzing Show, helping you work less, earn more, and reach more people through creative content marketing. Join the Coach Zingers community, where the world's best coaches, therapists, authors, and speakers come together to discover the latest trends, forge powerful joint ventures, and grow their business together. Go to coachzing.com/community to join. And now, here's your host, Doug Foresta.
Hello and welcome back to the Coachzing Show. This is your host, Doug Foresta, as always. And this is a show will help you to work less, earn more, and help more people through creative content marketing. Back with me today is Michele PW. And for those of you that remember, last time we spoke about love-based copywriting, and of course that's a big part of what she does. Today we're going to talk about something I think is really fascinating and a good thing for all of us to think about, which is about how do you get to your best content and how do you really get to your voice and the process of that and the idea that it is a process. So I know you get a lot out of this episode. Stay tuned. Michele PW, many of you know her. She's the best-selling author of love-based copywriting books that teach people how to write copy that attracts, inspires, and invites, and the owner of Creative Concepts and Copywriting LLC, the premier direct response copywriting and marketing agency through which she guides entrepreneurs in attracting more clients and boosting their business. And you can grab your free love-based biz kit at michelepw.com. That's MICHELEPW.com. We'll put that link on the show page. Michele PW, welcome back to the Coachzing Show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. So, let's start with, so it was probably about, oh boy, I don't remember exactly, but probably about a year ago that you and I spoke. And so at that point, you had love-based copywriting, and it sounds like you, well, first of all, you've released a second book, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. So what ended up happening, so not only did I release a second book, but I actually turned the whole thing into a series. Now I have the Love-Based Business series. I'm actually working on book 3 in that series, which is going to be Love-Based Online Marketing. And the first two books are the first two in the sort of the love-based they're talking about love-based copywriting. So that's sort of like the whole love-based business philosophy.
And you and I were chatting a bit before we started the episode. And one of the things you were talking about is that in the doing of getting out there, writing the second book, that you then went back and made changes to the first book. So I'd really love to hear about how that worked for you. Like, how did that end up happening?
So it's actually a really interesting story how this whole thing came about, which I think, some people listening, if you've got kind of like this idea brewing or this message that you want to get out, this might be kind of interest of you. So anyways, I got the idea. Susan Liddy came out with love-based marketing. And when I saw love-based marketing and then I thought love-based copywriting, and it was like, boom, suddenly I realized what everybody had been telling me for years, which is they wanted me to come up with a different way to write copy. And they all named it conscious copywriting and attraction copywriting, which I didn't like. But when I saw the love-based copywriting, it all fell into place because now I understood that traditional direct response copywriting was based on the fear-based emotions, but you didn't have to do that. You could actually sell using love-based emotions. So I wrote the first book and I named it. And the thing is that I launched it. So I wanted to do this all very quickly. So I got the book done and then I launched it. And the other thing I would have launched it anyways, but one other thing that came into about was my mother was she had cancer and she had a particularly bad diagnosis that summer as well. But so it's like I remember like one of the things was when I was trying to get everything in place to publish it, like the cover really, and I love my designer, but she didn't do a very good job of the cover and I didn't push her. So the cover was kind of bad and immature and the title wasn't quite right, which I realized later. And, and even some of the philosophy and some of the stuff that I talked about I didn't go far enough. I started it and I got the process starting, but it wasn't as completely clear in my head. I hadn't thought as much about everything that maybe I should have, and I also didn't I knew that I needed a second book that was more of a nuts and bolts, but I didn't really divide the books as well as I should have. So in other words, I launched a flawed product, but it was still a very valuable and powerful flawed product, but it was flawed. Well, what happened is that I went around and I started talking about it, like I was on your show and I went to other people's shows and I talked about it. And the more I talked about it, the more clear I got on everything. And I started to realize, some of the holes that I had left out. And I also got very clear on what the second book needed to be. And I actually got very clear on this whole idea of this whole love-based business, like all the books in the series and how this can all pull together so that we can really, if we choose, we can build businesses based on love versus based on fear. And a lot of traditional business, I think, is based on fear. Hence why there's why we have such a push-pull against to it. I mean, business itself is neutral, but if you choose to kind of base it on fear-based emotions, then, that's going to be all kind of caught up into it.
Right.
So this summer I went back, I got the second book done, which is much more nuts and bolts. I went back and fixed all the things with the first book. I changed the title, I changed the cover, and I released it. So now I have two very strong books out there that are better, more accurate of my vision and what I was talking about. But I never would have gotten there if I'd waited. If I just sat there with this book and tried to make it perfect in my own on my computer, typing things out, it wouldn't have happened. It was only by talking about it and getting feedback from people is when I was able to make the transformation and really see what was going on and go more deeply into this.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I love about that is I think we all know people like this. And I've certainly had clients like this where they're so waiting to get it perfect that they never put anything out.
Exactly.
As one day when it's perfect, I'll put it out.
Yeah.
And I think what I hear you saying is, when you put it out, that you need to put it out there in order to start the process of perfecting it, if there is such a thing as perfect.
If there is, the thing is one of the things that writers especially get stuck on, but I suspect is everything, is we get so fall in love with our own vision and we have to make it perfect. But the reality of the situation is the readers are actually the one that define us, not us as writers.
Right.
And so it's only by putting something out there and getting the feedback. I got some really nasty reviews. That's the other thing too. I've never talked about this before. So if all of you are afraid to put it out because you might get some horrible reviews, you can go to my first book and you can go read them. And one of them in particular was just nasty. That she said that I wrote it was a terrible book and I was writing to a 6-year-old. So in other words, if none of you want to read something complicated, you should definitely read my book.
It's simple. It's simple and easy to read.
For a 6-year-old. But so there were some truly dreadful reviews that floored me. And but the thing is that I thought about them and well, okay, so the nastiness aside, there were some glimpses in there, because one of the things that I hadn't made it clear was the first book was just about the philosophy. I didn't want to get into the nuts and the bolts because I wanted it to be a book. It's like if somebody already understood the nuts and bolts about copywriting, I still wanted them to read my book because then they could apply the love-based philosophy to what they already knew. I didn't think they would buy a nuts and bolts copywriting book. So that was the confusion that I didn't separate out. And so that's what those reviews were kind of nailing me on. So I was able to take that, but if I wouldn't have gotten that feedback if I just sat on it, if I've been afraid of that feedback. So there is still things in here that that you need to look at all of it, and you need to get this feedback and then see what you can really do to improve and get your gifts out there in a bigger way.
One of the things that's interesting about it is, I think of what's that term, minimum viable product, and so I guess one of the questions is, I mean, obviously, we want to put our best foot forward, but at the same time, how do you balance sort of putting your best foot forward with also just getting it out there?
Yeah, so the philosophy itself was very strong. I mean, that's what people were reacting to. So my vision was strong. So I think that's the point. If your vision is strong, your message is strong. You might need some refinements, like I did, like in how. So I think that's the key, and I love that question, because I think on the whole, the message itself is very strong, and I had thought that out. But it was some of the refinements. Like one of the things that I talk about in this new version is this idea of hope, because one of the things that surprised me is hope is a love-based emotion. But when I was talking to people would say, hope isn't love-based, hope is fear-based. Yeah. And I realized that fear that the problem is that the traditional marketers who were using fear they've twisted a lot of emotion. So they've twisted hope into
Right.
false hope. So even though hope, and so it's almost like we needed to reclaim hope. But again, I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't been talking about it. So it was more refining and tweaking it and making sure the vehicles that I created, like I had separated the books out better. I had more clearly stated what they would get in each book. I thought I had stated it, but I hadn't stated it enough. So that's the kind of thing, that sort of refinement that I was able to do. But the overall message was still very strong.
Another thing that is a really interesting takeaway for me as a podcaster is to think about how you said, you went on different podcasts and you started speaking about the book. Do you think that the being a guest on, podcasts and internet, internet shows, do you think that, like, sort of having to talk about it, did that help you as well in terms of
Yes, that
it?
absolutely helped me as well, because I was able to get, like, I listened to, like, the, because, I mean, obviously there's kind of some set questions, but most conversation. So when I hear, your response to something that I say, and also I say things a little differently every time, and then I hear how you're responding back to it. That gave me, I was able to then more, figure out where I wasn't being clear, and be able to pinpoint and get more clear and more specific about what I was trying to teach.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's I hadn't really thought of that as I obviously thought about, being on podcasts for authors in terms of getting your message out and reaching more people, but I hadn't thought of it as a way to actually make your book better.
Yeah,
Right?
I think it really did. Yes, it absolutely did, because I was able to really refine that. So yeah, and so if just as long as you're open to it. So, so the key is be okay with launching something just to get it out the door, so you can get that kind of feedback, and then be okay going back and changing it. Now, I will tell you that writing the second edition actually in some cases was harder than the first. Who would have thought? But it was very hard to do it. But that aside, it was a better process.
Now, I mean, it's so what? Well, tell me more about what was harder about the second edition than writing the second edition than the first edition. I'm curious about that.
Oh, because, I thought about this. I think it's because the first edition, you can kind of get into the flow and you're sort of writing the whole thing as it is. But with the second edition, so I went through and I read it and I saw, okay, so I have to change this. I have to add a paragraph. I have to go detail. And so this idea, like, there are times my writing just, usually I would say, like, I want to write like 500 words a day or 1,000 words a day or whatever. I couldn't do that with the second edition because I would just get stuck. And then I would put the paragraph, and then I would read it. Like, the next day I would read what I added, and I'd be like, okay, that didn't work at all. I have to fix the transition. So I was constantly, like, moving copy around, and it's like, does the transition work here? Does it work better here? So it was a very stop and go and stuttery process. It wasn't, which kind of drove me crazy. But again, I mean, even though I didn't like it, I wouldn't change it, because I think I couldn't have gotten there any other way, because I couldn't have actually fixed if I hadn't had a book to talk about, I wouldn't have been able to be on shows like this. So that's what really made the difference.
I think it's great to hear, for people to be like, wow, if Michele PW, like, if that's true for her, then, maybe that can be true for me too. And yeah, I really see that the difference for me, I say this over and over again to clients, is that just get it. There's that saying, don't get it right, get it written. And
Yes.
there is that thing about, like you said, if you have the message, get it out into the world. And if somebody, to be honest, I don't know how you feel about this, but if somebody had a thought or idea or tip or whatever it is that was going to help my life or my business, on some level, I don't care if they wrote it on the back of a napkin, and gave it to me.
Yeah, you need to get it out there. I was reading an interesting story about independent publishers and self-publishers, and it's interesting because now self-publishers actually can make more money than published authors who get royalties, because who's making the more money from the big publishing industries is the big publishers. Not the authors aren't seeing it as much, but they're finding out that people really don't care if it's self-published or not self-published. They just want, if it's a good book, that's all they care about. Is it a good book, and do I like it? And so, yes,
authors are the ones who care, right?
I think so too. Yeah, we want to have that outward, like somebody else saying, you're so good, we want to publish your book for you. So we want that outward, but we have to like believe in ourselves and believe in our work and not, and but yes, you're right.
Do you find that, so what is the process like now that you're doing this as a series? Like, do you find that your mindset has shifted now that now that you kind of know that you can go back and do this in terms of moving forward with the new books that you're writing?
Yeah, so it has loosened things up a little bit because I feel like now, well, I feel like now I can just keep getting better and more refining this. And the reality of the situation is I'm teaching something, I'm teaching a shift. And the thing is that, me teaching it is hopefully, in a perfect world, but I'm going to say, hopefully, people will listen and they will start to shift. Right. So then it's like I can work with something like a living thing, like I can see, like they can reflect back to me the shifts they're making. And so then I can continue to further refine things. So I feel like this could be more of a living, breathing thing. And it really could help transform things instead of me just coming out with something it's sort of dogma and it never changes. This is a way for me to, this is like a give or take thing, something shifts outside. I can shift the message to reflect that can shift, so I'm almost getting real feedback.
Michele PW, thank you so much for joining me. Look forward to continuing the conversation as always. And I want to remind you that if you have not subscribed to the podcast, go ahead and go to iTunes, click the subscribe button, and you'll get over 350 episodes helping you to work less, earn more, and help more people through creative content marketing. Till next time, this is Doug Foresta at the Coachzing Show.
Thank you for listening to the Coachzing Show. Subscribe to us via iTunes, and please leave us a review. It helps us grow our awesome tribe. This show is brought to you by Coachzing.com's Speak to Publish book system. If your book is stuck in your head, we can help you get it out in just a dozen hours of your time. Go to Coachzing.com for more information. Have you joined the Coach Zingers community yet? You'll get exclusive access to private mastermind calls where you can get instant marketing help from industry experts. Plus, we'll help you forge deals and partnerships with other like-minded professionals. Go to Coachzing.com/community to join now.